Okay, everyone, welcome back. So, the second half of this first session is going to be on Fauvism and mainly Matisse, who's an incredibly important French painter of the early 20th century. Some people have the beginnings of 20th century modernism with Fauvism. We decided to start in Vienna, but now we move to Fauvism and Paris and French painting. So this corresponds with the chapter 1906. So let's start with some of these quotes that are pulled out by Bois, who writes this chapter, from a really prominent critic at that time, Charles Maurice. And he sent out this questionnaire to a number of the major artists of the time. And one of the questions is really illustrative of the stakes of painting at that time and the beginnings of painterly modernism, as we started talking about in the first half of class. So he asked this question to a number of painters. Must the painter expect everything from nature, or must he only ask from it the plastic means to realize the thought that's in him? So this seems a little confusing at first, but I think if I tease out the implications or tease out the language, it'll make more sense. So the first part of this question, he's asking, basically, do painters or do artists always have to take from nature? Do they always have to represent nature? Does painting always have to be naturalistic? So do the origins of art always have to be the outside, the natural world, as it's been conceived since the Renaissance, and then of course going all the way back to ancient Greece, at least in the Western tradition? Or can you use natural elements simply as a means of expressing what the artist wants to express, something that's inside of him or her, an emotion, or the way in which the outside world works on us, impacts us, affects us, right? So here the idea is not so much the outside world as being the primary producer of creativity, as a thing that always has to be represented, but simply as a material or a means to actually represent what's going on inside the artist. So here is where you have the opportunity for art to simply be an expressive use of line, of color, of composition, of the picture plane. So moving away from art as having to represent the world, and thinking, conceiving of art in this more modern sense that we've been talking about, as using the materials and the medium of, in our case, mainly today, of painting, as a more expressive means that can go beyond simply representing the world in a naturalistic way. So when you see the word plastic, plastic is an older way of basically saying medium. So not plastic in the sense of like the stuff we need to cut back on because it's not biodegradable and it's accumulating in our oceans. Here, the word plastic is being used almost synonymously with medium. So, materiality, paint, sculpture, marble, so on and so forth. So that's what that quote means. And it gets us to a major insight for really all of early 20th century art, which comes out of the Post-Impressionists, who were very important for Matisse. So if you'll remember, maybe you had an intro class or you've had a 19th century course. The four major Post-Impressionists are Cézanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Seurat. And they're really important painters of the latter 19th century. They set up the stakes. They set up what's going to happen in the earliest 20th century, especially beginning with Matisse, who we study today. And they all, in their own way, stress that color and line, if they're to be celebrated as like their own sensuous, material, physical qualities, and the way we experience them through paintings that we look at, if they're going to be expressive, if they're going to function expressively, then they need to become independent from the objects they depict. So it's a little like in music. I always use this example because in music it would be crazy to ask a composer or a songwriter that every sound they make has to sound like something in the natural world, that it has to sound like cars going by or leaves rustling in the wind or water cascading down a waterfall or something like that. No, that would be insane. That would be so limiting. A composer or a songwriter can use sounds for their own intrinsic worth and quality and interests, right? Well, here we have the equivalent with painting, where painters are now going to use line, color, composition, fracture, the surface of the picture plane of the canvas for its own inherent qualities, and it's not necessarily going to represent the natural world. So this is, in essence, a revolution in painting, and it's often described as like a liberation of color, a liberation of line, a liberation of the medium. And so Matisse is certainly part of this. So initially, Matisse is a student of Signac, who himself is basically a disciple of Georges Seurat, that fourth post-impressionist we just talked about. And Signac argues that there's a history of painting. Your chapter sets this up, which will lead to this sort of liberation of color. He says that since Delacroix, a romantic French painter, up through the Impressionists, come right before the Post-Impressionists in the latter half of the 19th century, you have a history of painting where color is being emancipated. There's a gradual emancipation of color, where it no longer has to represent the world. Now you're getting basically pure, undifferentiated color straight from the tube, in the case of Georges Seurat and even some of the Impressionists. So there's a history of this, and for Signac, it culminates in Seurat's painting. So Seurat is like, in some ways, the end of this history for him, and Signac himself will paint in Seurat's style, which is a very, very, very famous painting. If you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, this features somewhat prominently in one of those scenes when they go to the museum. And of course, you probably study this if you've taken an intro class or a 19th century class, because it's such a famous painting. But Seurat's a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte from 1884 to 6. And so Signac will work in this style of Seurat. It's a complex style, but let me show it to you if you've never seen it before up close. You don't understand the style and the method of Seurat unless you're up close in the painting. And once you get up close, you realize that he's using a method that's all points. It was called pointillism or divisionism. And each little dot is uniform. They're all the same. So think of this scientific method. He's going in very meticulously and putting in all this color into these little dots. And they're not mixed. All these dots are pure color from the tube. And Seurat was doing something almost crazy. He thought that because light that's flooding wherever you are right now, there's light around you. Since light is made of a spectrum, is made of colors, and with a prism you can separate those colors, like you can see them, at least the ones that as human beings we can see. My cat can see infrared. Other animals can see other lights in the spectrum, but we see a certain set. He thought that if you took all those colors separately, you didn't mix them, and you put them in little dots on the picture plane, that in our eyes, when we looked at his paintings, they would coalesce, they would mingle back together, and the painting looked like it would be luminous, like it would be emanating light. Of course, that's not how light works, but this was, in the chapter, what calls this the Holy Grail of painters. And Holy Grail means it's an impossible thing to reach, using paint to make it look like it's actual light. The other thing that's important about Seurat is his use of complementary colors. There's hardly any blacks in his work, and he'll actually go in and use complementary colors. Like here, you're having there's a bit of red and green next to each other, and then of course the predominant tension and color in these dots are the complementary colors between yellow and blue. And so this creates an effect and a certain amount of tension that's really important for what comes next with Matisse and Fauvism. And so here is Matisse. Initially he goes to Saint Tropez, which we'd all love to go to Saint Tropez. It's a beautiful place in southern France. And he's working with Signac and other painters, and they're working in this pointillist, divisionist, neo-impressionist style that was developed by Seurat and Signac is championing. And Matisse works on a number of different canvases in this style, but the major one is this one, the Luxe, Calme et Volupté, which comes from a Baudelaire poem from 1904 to 1905. And you can tell Matisse is working in this pointillist style. The strokes seem to be much bigger than Signac or Seurat, but by and large, it does seem to be this sort of methodical, again, almost scientific use of color and standardized individual strokes to create an image, to create the painting. And he's also using all sorts of different colors, oftentimes juxtaposing complementary colors. Here there's a bit of like orange, yellow next to blue and purple, which creates this, it does create this oscillating, intense effect. This is like it's a hot canvas. It really feels like it's emanating a certain amount of warmth, which is what he's going for, right? It's this beach scene with these four nymphs. There's a little child that's wrapped in a towel, and then his presumably his mother sitting, and then there's like a picnic on the beach. So it's like this idyllic beach scene that's really emanating this incredible warmth, this incredible glow that you get. Maybe, this is towards the end of the day, and the sun is already starting to glimmer off the quiet coast of the Mediterranean here. So it's this really idyllic scene. And Signac loved this painting. He actually bought it, and it would be in his house in Saint Tropez until like 1950 or something. So the public didn't see this for a long time. And he liked it because it seemed to work with his method, right? It seemed to be like Matisse was, he's a disciple, he's doing neo-impressionism, and he's adopting this style. But all along, Matisse is not that at ease with this. He's anxious about this style. You'll remember from the beginning of the chapter, he's anxious about Cézanne. Cézanne is the great French painter that seems to be lording. His influence is just like this lording influence. So like it creates a certain amount of anxiety in Matisse, as does Seurat. So Matisse is this painter who's searching for his own method. He's searching for his own system. He doesn't want to be slavishly indebted to a previous system, and then simply like a clerk or like a functionary somewhere, just then using the method and making paintings, right? He's really trying to break through to something new, and that something new will come a year later, or actually in 1905 in the fall, with the Fauvist breakthrough of 1905, of the fall of 1905. And it's in this Fauvist breakthrough where he doesn't only come to grips with Seurat, as you see in the Luxe, Calme et Volupté. He starts to integrate and in some ways synthesize, though maybe somewhat uneasily, all the four post-impressionists. So Van Gogh, Gauguin, Seurat, and Cézanne. So this leads to this Fauvist breakthrough, which happens in 1905 at the Salon d'Automne, the autumnal fall salon in Paris. This was probably the most ridiculed painting in the whole exhibition. The Woman with Hat from 1905. This was in this exhibition. And it's from this exhibition that we get the term fauve. So there was a critic, his name was Louis Vauxelles, and he saw these new, to his eyes, completely crazy and juvenile, like kids smearing color and paint. He saw these new paintings next to another room where there was like an academic marble, like this is Donatello. This is the Donatello wasn't there, but a Donatello-like statue, which would have been like an academic classical work. And so in his review, he says this was Donatello among the wild beasts. Fauve in French means feral or wild. So he's saying that these paintings were just crazy. These were just wild paintings. And he meant it disparagingly. like he meant it as an insult. But as with so many of these terms, it actually stuck. And now Fauvism, Fauves, is this incredibly important early movement of the 20th century, which in fact was not crazy. It may have had something to do with childhood. Matisse and some of these artists were trying to see the world again as a child would, which can be quite refreshing. So just the joy of pure color, just the joy of the natural world, like doing stuff to your eyes, rather than just like thinking that, yeah, whatever, color is color, who cares about color? And those are a bunch of trees, it's a landscape, let's get on with life, let's get a job, make money, whatever, right? Uh, the Fauves may very well have been trying to tap into a more childlike wonder of getting back to looking at the world for like this. It's an incredible thing, right? It's got color, the sun is going through trees, and it's a really amazing thing to witness and to be alive. But Fauvism was not some sort of just crazy slapdash thing. Matisse was really working through a number of things through these paintings. So it seems like the critics didn't quite understand. This was a laughing stock at the time, but now we understand that Fauvism was actually there was a system in place, and it's above all Matisse who sort of figures out this system. He's not the only one though. In fact, Maurice de Vlamic, here you're seeing an example of his work. Again, you see like this intense color, and color divorced from reality, right? It's color being used for its own physical properties on our eyes, and maybe more than just on our eyes. Like, if I describe these paintings as having like there's a heat emanating from them, that's not just eyes. That's like that's something you feel on your skin. That's something like you're actually like being embedded in a more synesthetic, like in a more synesthetic experience, one that uses more than just the senses of seeing. Matisse is actually influenced by Vlamic. He sees one of Vlamic's paintings and he says, wow, I can't believe someone is using color so almost willy-nilly in such a untamed fashion, I guess, if we're going to use this metaphor of wildness. And you see it in, again, the most ridiculed painting of this exhibition, which is Matisse's wife, the woman with the hat. And so you have like her neck, you have this bright orange underneath this seafoam green that's part of her cheek. That makes really no sense as far as spatial depth, because of course a cool color is going to recede, whereas a warm color is going to pop forward. So it makes no sense that what should be receding or a little further back, her neck and her cheek, what should be protruding forward, they flipped. And here we have a use of complementary colors right next to each other where it starts to oscillate. These complementary colors, when you put them together, it creates this tension and almost this oscillation, which even the Impressionists knew about. But of course, Seurat used it to great effect with his pointillism. Derain was also important. So André Derain was a friend of Matisse. They go to a town in southern France, right near Spain, the Basque region, and they paint together. And this is where you have the Fauve breakthrough. So again, this image, this painting with just really wild color, and in some cases the color is divorced from anything you could possibly see in real life, right? And so let's spend a little bit of time on probably the most famous Fauvist work, and that's Open Window by Matisse. And it's an open window where you can see that, yes, I mean, this does look like, in some ways, especially if you know what comes before this, like this does seem to be like I don't know if chaotic is the word, but there is something intense about this painting. But it's not crazy. It's not without its own system. It's not without a certain logic. And it's really important to realize that what Matisse is doing with these Fauvist works is he's incorporating everything he's learned from all those four post-impressionists. So it's helpful to put post-impressionist works side by side to see, well, what has he taken? How has he synthesized these four great post-impressionists? And we can spend a lot of time doing this. I'm not gonna give you everything, because otherwise we'll be here for like an hour and longer. But I think you, in your through your own eyes, you're going to see that there are certain affinities, certain things that he's taken from each one, and synthesized them in his own Fauvism system, beyond what I point out. But one of the big things he takes from Van Gogh, like the key, one of the first great expressionist painters, is using paint in a very thick, very thick way. When if you ever seen a Van Gogh in person, it's almost like icing on a cupcake or something like that. Like sometimes the paint is so thick, it's coming off the surface of the canvas, almost like those maps that are topographical that show you mountain ridges and that sort of thing. Like there are moments and passages in his paintings where the painting is coming out super thick. So in this wheat field, you get this sense of this. And maybe also in the cypress trees and in the bushes, and maybe even in the clouds too. You start to get passages where the brushstroke is so thick it's almost being raised from the surface of the canvas. Well, you can definitely see that in Matisse's open window. So in the water where the boats are, this was a window in this Collioure, a town in southern France where he was staying with his fellow Fauves. This was the open window where he was staying, and so he paints it. And you see the boats and the ocean, the Mediterranean, and the sky. It's just so thick, the paint, as are the plants. The other big thing that he takes from Van Gogh is his use of line. So there's often quite a bit of line in Van Gogh's work, which is a real departure from let's say Impressionism that comes before, where you can almost never see lines, except probably in Degas. But you have these sort of thick lines, and the lines will vary in thickness and wideness, which create certain effects. And Matisse also uses that to create line and to create movement within his paintings. But above all, it's this big impasto technique that he takes from Van Gogh. From Gauguin, who we'll talk about quite a bit next week when we talk about primitivism in early 20th century art, he takes sort of somewhat broad passages of color that really don't have anything to do with the scene, the real scene that was there. So Gauguin, in a lot of his works where he was escaping Europe into Tahiti, or trying to escape in Tahiti, he'll make these natural scenes, these local scenes where in the water and parts of the landscape, you'll have these almost psychedelic passages of color, really broad color that we never, you haven't seen this ever in the history of Western painting. And so Matisse takes this from Gauguin, where you have this fuchsia, you have the seafoam green, you have this orange, all these colors that make the painting sort of just glow and expand, rather than simply represent this open window, which the photograph could do just as well. So he takes that from Gauguin. From Seurat, we talked about already how he went through this neo-impressionist phase, so he gets rid of the dots. Like he's not interested in just making all these dots, these meticulous dots. But he does keep the sense of tension and visual oscillation when it comes to the use of color that you see in Seurat. So he's not doing it with dots anymore, but he's doing it with larger passages of color. So this seafoam green, blue is being juxtaposed with orange. As it is here, you have this green and this orange and then this fuchsia. So these are not exact complementary colors, but they do create this effect, and you see it in the boats, where part of the boats are orange, and then the lower parts are this deeper blue. Those are complementary colors, and they do create this kind of effect. And so he's using these complementary colors to create this sort of luminosity and this property of color that was so fascinating to the Impressionists, Post-Impressionists, and now the Fauves. And then from Cézanne, he takes the idea. Cézanne is really difficult. We'd have to spend a whole session on Cézanne to really understand him. But one of the things that Cézanne is so important for is that he's one of the first painters to start thinking of the landscape or whatever he's painting. He's interested in showing you that landscape, So in this instance, Mont Saint-Victoire, a mountain in France, and this countryside that's in front of it, and the sky. He wants to show you that landscape, but he doesn't want to sacrifice the overall structure of the painting itself. And so you'll notice that almost everything he's showing you, he's using a similar, like hatching brushwork. These are thick, like hash marks. And he's using it for the houses, for the landscape, for the mountain, and for the clouds itself, for the sky. Normally, when you think of a landscape like this, you would think of the mountain rising out of an undifferentiated, smooth sky, maybe with a few soft clouds, and then the landscape, it would be coming towards you. You'd have a certain amount of depth and perspective. You don't really get that in Cézanne. In Cézanne, you're getting this overall structure where even the sky has this hatchy brushstroke structure that everything else has. So what he sacrifices in illusion, in naturalism, he gains in the overall structure of the painting itself. So Cézanne's incredibly important for early histories of modernism because people notice that, well, okay, here's a painter that's showing you the world, but he's also showing you paint itself. He's almost like doing double duty. This will be important for Picasso and Braque that we talk about next week. Well, Matisse is doing a very similar thing here. There's nothing in Open Window that sort of goes into the background. That's like the quiet background effect of what maybe is more important, like the boats or the scenery or whatever. No, even the wall that's sort of framing and the doors themselves have as much structure and as much visual interest, in this case through color, as everything else in the scene. And it's through the use of color, and it's through the use of these big patches of paint where Matisse, even more clearly than Cézanne, is giving you a two-dimensional picture plane that's highly structured. Like it's in every piece is in tension with itself, and you're not just focusing on one thing. The whole thing is this unified, sort of satisfying structure. So that's an encapsulation of how Fauvism was not just this crazy thing that was just these artists painting like children. It was, especially for Matisse, this systematic response to the great post-impressionist painters that come before him. And Matisse was definitely an artist who wanted his own style, like he wanted to break through to something new. And so if Fauvism was like a synthesis of what was available to him through post-impressionism, it's his next insight, right after his Fauvis episode. Fauvism lasts only for a season. It only lasts, for Matisse anyways, for that fall. But the thing he comes to find after this Fauvis phase of his is a property of color and a property of paint that he seems to discover. That it becomes his thing. It becomes his axiom for the rest of his life, for the rest of his painting career. And he has a long, long career. And this principle or this axiom that he stumbles on is, this should not be a shock. This should not come as a surprise, but it has to do with color. Color is so important for Matisse and the Fauves. But this principle that he comes up with can be reduced to this saying: 1 square centimeter of any blue is not the same blue as a square. 1 square centimeter of any blue is not as blue as a square meter of the same blue. And of course, blue is arbitrary here. It doesn't matter. It could be red. He has a very famous painting called The Red Room, which is at MoMA. I actually don't show it to you, but you can look it up. This can be any color, but this is his big epiphany: is that the amount of color, the quantity of color, actually affects the quality of the color. Quantity and quality have an intrinsic relationship, a rapport with each other. They're not separate. And so this is hard to do on a computer screen, but if you see it in real life in a painting, I think it's a little bit more obvious. But here is a pretty large square blue, and here's a smaller square blue. And take a second, which one looks darker to your eyes? Usually, and it is for me right now, it's the smaller blue that's more blue than the larger blue. So the quality of the blue changes, even though I can tell you for sure that this blue is the same blue because this is simply just a piece of, this is just taken out of this same blue. So the amount of paint and the quantity of color changes in quality according to its size. So this is a big insight for Matisse. And then on top of that, we again have his interest and his use of complementary colors, which when you place them side by side, so here you have orange and blue, when you place them side by side, you not only have this oscillation, this tension between these two colors, but maybe you can see it even on the computer screen. When you look at the orange, you get a little bit of blue in there because it's next to the blue. And vice versa. You get a little bit of orange in the blue because it's next to that orange. We know this is a thing that happens with these colors. So the quantity of the color not only changes because of size, but also because of rapport, because of what it's next to. So if it's next to one color as opposed to another, it's going to have different qualities no matter how subtle. So this is very important for Matisse. And he puts it to full use in really the major breakthrough. This is one of the most important paintings of the early 20th century, at least in the Western tradition. And that's Le Bonheur de Vivre. So this comes out of his Fauvist explorations, and you can tell like this incredible use of color, this acid yellow, really deep oranges and reds, and then these much more evanescent grayish blues and greens. He has this really incredible, again, almost psychedelic use of colors. But now he's not so much interested in synthesizing all the post-impressionists. He's still using some of these insights, but he's more interested in this discovery of his, that quantity of color changes the quality. And relationships between colors also changes the relationships of those colors. So this massive painting is a very large painting, is in part an exploration of quantity of color and the plasticity of the quality of that color according to size and according to its structure and its place within all the other colors in the painting. And this is a really fascinating work. Again, it's one of the most important paintings. Some people begin 20th century modernism with this very painting. And it's for lots of different reasons. One of the reasons, of course, is this use of color that's divorced from reality, right? He's using color to evoke something inside him, to evoke something about this scene. It's a totally imaginary scene, but he's not really interested in showing you this pastoral scene as a naturalistic one. Like, this is more like a fever dream. This is more like a dream work. And Freud, and what we talked about in the first part of class, will come into this a little bit today. So the use of color and paint for its own properties, for its own material properties, divorced from naturalism. This is a key testament to the beginnings of this in the early 20th century. It's also a very strange painting. So the relationships between figures are very unclear. This was very disturbing to a lot of critics. I should have said at the beginning, just like the Fauvist paintings, critics hated this work. They were really incensed by it. It really challenged them. In large part because of the color, but also because Matisse was very clearly playing with and maybe attacking, maybe making fun of, maybe parodying, and definitely challenging a whole history of Western art history through this painting. So using certain references from art history, I mean, the scholars have had a field day with this. There's a whole literature just on this painting of people finding references. So references to the Renaissance, references to Ingres and French classicism from the 18th and 19th century, but also all the way back to prehistoric cave painting. Like, this is the flute player, the goat herder in the back here, and you have these goats, but it almost doubles. The goats almost double as cave painting. So going all the way back to Paleolithic art, the very origins of art. It's as if this is a pastiche of all these different references of art history, but of course all jumbled together in this almost incoherent, again, fever dream of art history. So there's a lack of unity, there's a lack of coherence in the themes and in the styles that really disturbed a lot of critics. And there's also a lack of spatial understanding. Um, it seems to be floating, and there are certain relationships between the figures, but they don't seem to make that much sense. So if this is really all the same plane, then these women that are lounging in the center, they must be huge, right? And these people must be tiny. So there's a lack of spatial depth and correspondence between all these figures, which disturbed a lot of people. So one of the paintings that it's based off of, that he's tapping into, is this pastoral tradition that you can see in someone like Ingres, so French classicism of the 19th century. This is the Golden Age, a really well-known painting. And it's part of this pastoral tradition in painting where you get the origins of humans. In this case, this is like a Greek origin. You have Zeus in the center looking over the whole thing. And basically, the Golden Age is a time of innocence. It's almost like you can see it in like images of Eden, but it's basically this time of innocence where humans are happy, sexuality is free, everyone's naked. It's just life is good. Everybody's like having a good time, and you don't have all the complications of civilization, of certainly of cities, of modernity, and of history. You just have this pastoral, beautiful, idyllic landscape with nude bodies and everyone frolicking and enjoying themselves, right? So, in some sense, especially for white Western male viewers, though not necessarily, this is a very comforting image. This is a very comforting self-conception of history and of human beings. Matisse completely disturbs this. He completely disturbs it. So he is tapping into this pastoral tradition, but only to liquidate it, only to sort of make it all melt in this white hot heat, this yellow acidic heat of his paintings. And you don't really get the same, at least critics thought, you don't get the same sort of stability, coherence, and pleasure that you do looking at the Golden Age. Then if you turn to Matisse, this all of a sudden becomes like almost an assault. Of these really loud, garish, bright, psychedelic colors. They're more assaulting the viewer in some ways, and destabilizing the viewer. And Matisse has taken it even one step further, because if you notice, the whole history of Western art history has been predicated on the human figure, and also very clear distinctions and roles between women and men. So if you do an analysis of the history of Western art, you're going to see, in many cases, very traditional gender roles where men are doing certain things and women are doing others. Usually the men are doing the active things and the women are doing the more passive things. And there's going to be a very clear understanding of who, even like when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to the body itself, who is a woman and who is a man. So this very stable binary that orders the world for the Western imagination, going back to Greece all the way up to this period. Matisse has completely destabilized that and scrambled it, mainly because most of these figures are undecidedly male or female, or maybe they're a little bit of both. The only figure that seems to be really safely male would be the goat herder. So he's definitely male. You have other figures that are undeniably female, so the two in the center. But then you have others, like this figure, who seems to be on the left side more female, and then on the right side more male. This figure is somewhat undecidable. The flute player with the two flute in the front, also undecidable. Somewhat more people notice that he or she is more androgynous. And then the set of figures that people have had the most fun analyzing and are most disturbed by are these two figures here, which looks like two human beings sort of like fusing together, as if like this maybe male figure, his head is fusing with this female figure. And so you have this real destabilization of gender in this painting, which would have been very, very, it would have made critics back then very, very uneasy. This is actually an idea that makes some people uneasy today. The idea that gender is a fluid thing, or a thing that's multi-categoried rather than a simple binary. And so there are arguments that Matisse, what he's done through this painting, he's committed parricide in paint, and parricide is killing of the father. And in this case, this is not a literal father, obviously, but basically the fathers of art history, all the people that come before him, the whole history of art, all the way up to cave painting. It's as if he's used it all, laid it bare, and sort of updated it, in some cases, sort of undercut it, and really critiqued it in some ways, or problematizes it, as a way forward through this history. And so it's very destabilizing. And there's just one last thing to say about this painting. Again, it's so rich in interpretations. I'm only giving you the surface. But one of the most famous interpretations of this painting, which is mentioned at the very end of chapter 1906, is this idea that Matisse has painted all the infant drives. So oral fixation, anal fixation, exhibitionism, sadism, all these drives that Freud said that we all have as little babies, where we're just like pleasure bundles that are just trying to, satiate ourselves. We're just trying to greet all our to match all the desires that we have. And in some cases, when you're super young, like a little baby, you don't even differentiate yourself from like your mother. You're sort of connected. You think she's an extension of you, right? And she's there for your pleasure. Some people read this figure, this coupling figure, as a regression back to that moment where the child is fusing back into the mother's body. So this might sound like a crazy interpretation, but it makes a certain amount of sense. It's as if Matisse is giving you all these drives that we all have as little babies, that then as we grow up and we learn language and we have parents, especially for Freud, the father, who says, no, like you can't have everything you want. You have to abide by certain rules of society, and you have to abide by my law as your parent, and so on and so forth. These drives are then subdued, right? They go into they go more as background noise. It's as if Matisse has brought them all back forward, all back to the front, but as adults here. So it's like a vision of this world as just pure pleasure, not only through color but also through the body, which seems to be like oozing its own properties here in paint. So you may think that's a completely harebrained interpretation, or you might think it's an interesting one, but it's definitely become part of this painting. So I think that's good. I think that's a good sort of encapsulation of some of the interpretations, and a nice introduction to Matisse and to Fauvism. So I hope you enjoyed the first session of Vienna Secession and Fauvism, and we will you'll hear again from me next week when we start with the influence of quote unquote primitive visual culture into the early history of 20th century European painting. Take care, everybody.